My world ended on a Tuesday morning. The first words from my son, Brian, weren't a greeting, but a bombshell. "Mum, your car's gone. We traded it." The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the tile floor, its warmth and its promise of a peaceful morning dissolving into a mess I couldn't clean up. My sanctuary, the home I'd built on routine and memory, felt suddenly alien. I stood frozen in a puddle of lukewarm coffee and broken porcelain, staring at the empty driveway where my late husband's car had always been. It was gone, just like that. Life had a rhythm to it after David passed. Every morning, I would wake at 6, make myself a cup of coffee in my favorite mug, the one with the delicate blue flowers, and sit by the kitchen window. I'd watch the sun filter through the curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent, almost peaceful dance. My home was my sanctuary. Every corner held a story, every object a memory. The cream-coloured walls I had painted myself, the dark wood furniture we had inherited from his parents, the family photos on the mantel. All of it was a testament to a life well lived, a life I thought I was still living. The car was a core part of that life. It was a sturdy, reliable sedan, a practical choice that David had always insisted on. It was old, yes, but it was ours. It represented freedom and independence. I didn't drive it every day, but just knowing it was there, parked in its usual spot, was a comfort. I used it for my weekly grocery runs, for my occasional trips to see my sister in Delaware, and for driving to my support group meetings. It was my last true connection to David, a physical piece of him I could still touch. My son, Brian, was 35, a hard-working construction supervisor, or so he said. Lately, he seemed more tired and distant than usual. His phone was always in his hand, and he would answer my questions about his work in short, clipped sentences. He lived in the city with his wife, Linda, but he'd still call on weekends, and I always looked forward to our conversations. He was my only son, my rock. When my world felt like it was falling apart after David died, he and Linda were the ones who held me up. So when he said he'd traded the car, it felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the decision, made without a single word to me. I tried calling him again, my fingers fumbling with the keypad. He didn't answer. I left a message, my voice shaking with a mix of confusion and frustration. I tried to sound calm, but it was hard. "Brian, honey, it's Mum. I was just wondering about the car. Could you please call me back when you get a chance?" I knew he was busy, but this felt different. It felt like he was avoiding me. I decided to call Linda, his wife. Linda and I had always been close. She was a thoughtful and kind woman, and I often thought of her as the daughter I never had. I figured she could shed some light on this bizarre situation. But her phone went straight to voicemail. It was a strange silence that filled the house, a silence that felt heavier than usual. As the morning wore on, the initial shock gave way to a nagging worry. Why would he do that? Why wouldn't he tell me? It wasn't about the money. I wasn't a wealthy woman, but I was comfortable. David had left me a substantial life insurance policy, and I had my savings. The car wasn't a financial burden. It was the principle of it, the cold, casual way he had dismissed a part of my life, a piece of my husband's legacy. I walked out to the empty driveway again. The space felt hollow. My heart ached. I went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of what had happened. Then, a memory, sharp and sudden, cut through my days. The glove box. David had always kept a small wooden box in the glove box. He'd told me once that it held the most important things he owned, and if anything ever happened to him, I was to open it. I never had. and now it was gone. Along with the car, along with my peace of mind, the wooden box. That was the knot in my stomach. The loss of the car was an insult, but the missing box felt like a theft of the most sacred kind. It was a simple, unfinished pine box, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. David had given it to me on our 25th wedding anniversary. "It holds my core," he'd said, "and you're the only one who can unlock it, Joan." It had been sitting in that glove box for 15 years. I had honored his request, never looking inside. Now, in an instant, it had been carelessly sold, likely discarded as junk by some dealership employee in Florida. I tried Brian again, this time sending a direct text message, not caring if I sounded frantic. "Brian, I need to know the name and address of the dealer who took the car. Immediately. There was something important in the glove box. Not money. Something sentimental." The reply came back almost instantly, but it was clipped and dismissive. "Mum, they auction those things off fast. It's probably gone. I got you a fair price. A check is in the mail. Stop worrying about that old sedan. It was a money pit." A check is in the mail. His words hit me with a chilling lack of emotion. He was treating me like a child, placating me with a small financial transaction for a massive emotional loss. It wasn't about the money. It was about the secrets that Carr held. That's when the first spike of real suspicion hit me. Brian was never this short with me. He was always attentive, almost overly so, especially after David died. He and Linda had been constant fixtures, checking in, bringing groceries, fussing over my health. This sudden cold withdrawal felt manufactured, like a wall going up. I knew I couldn't trust him to help me find the car or the box. I needed professional help. My mind immediately went to Arthur Vance. Arthur had been David's best friend since college, and before retiring 5 years ago, a top-notch private investigator in Philadelphia. He had helped us out of a few scrapes over the years. He knew how my family worked, and most importantly, he had loved David like a brother. I called Arthur's number, my hand still slightly trembling from the broken mug incident. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same gravelly, reassuring sound I remembered. I laid out the whole situation for him, starting with the bizarre disappearance of the car and Brian's infuriating lack of concern. Arthur listened quietly. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line, much longer than I expected. "Joan," he finally said, his voice dropping an octave, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're talking about more than just a car. You're talking about a secret and sudden intense resistance from your own son. That's a red flag waving in the wind." He then did something unexpected. He didn't offer to track the car right away. Instead, he started asking about Brian and Linda. "Has Brian been in any trouble lately, financially or otherwise? Any new habits, any new friends you don't know about?" I hesitated. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but Brian had seemed excessively stressed. "He's working constantly. He says his construction company is facing some serious deadline pressures. And he's avoiding my eyes, Arthur. He answers in monosyllables. And Linda, she's always been sweet, but now she hardly ever comes over. When I suggest dinner, she says she's working late." Arthur's response sealed my immediate concern. "Joan, I want you to pretend everything is fine. Do not mention the box or the car again to Brian or Linda. Not one word. Tell Brian you forgive him for the hasty sale. Let's start digging, and we need to start close to home." He promised to be over that evening. It was during that long afternoon of waiting for Arthur that a tiny, insidious thought began to bloom in my mind. It wasn't just Brian. Linda was cold too. I remembered visiting them last month. I had suggested staying the night, but Linda had been insistent, almost manic, about me leaving. Oh, Mom, you know how cluttered we are. The guest room isn't clean. You really should just go back home. It's only an hour drive. At the time, I thought she was just being polite, embarrassed about a messy house. Now, I wondered if it was something else entirely, something sinister she wanted to keep hidden from me. The feeling of being truly alone, not just physically but emotionally, was worse than the shock of the broken mug. My quiet life had just turned into a mystery I never wanted to solve. Arthur arrived exactly when he said he would, just as the sun was setting, casting long, strange shadows across the driveway where the sedan used to sit. He didn't come in through the front door. Instead, he pulled his beat-up pickup truck into my neighbor's driveway and walked over, carrying a nondescript briefcase. This immediately brought a sense of quiet professionalism to the chaos in my head. He sat in my living room, refusing the offer of coffee, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room. He was a big man, slightly stooped now with age, but the intensity was still there. I told him everything again, emphasizing the wooden box and Brian's cold, impersonal response. "Joan," Arthur said, placing his hands on his knees. "We need to eliminate the easy answers first. The sentimental theory. Maybe Brian truly just thought it was junk, or maybe he needed cash fast. But your gut is telling you otherwise. And I trust your gut, especially since you're talking about Linda's behavior too." He then showed me a few things on his tablet. He'd already run a preliminary check on Brian's construction company. "The company is solid," Arthur confirmed. "But Brian himself, he's showing signs of severe financial distress. Not through the company, but personally. Unsecured loans, credit card balances maxed out. We're talking over $80,000 in revolving debt, and a couple of collections notices that are barely a month old. He's underwater, Joan." $80,000. The number hit me. Not a king's ransom, but certainly enough to make a desperate person do desperate things. However, Brian had his good job. He and Linda had a nice house. Why would they be struggling so badly? "We need to know what they're truly hiding," Arthur continued, leaning forward. "The car is the key, because it's what Brian wanted gone immediately. And not just the car, but specifically the glove box." Then I remembered something Linda had mentioned during one of her brief, hurried visits last year. She had casually asked about my will. Not the specifics of the money, but the technicalities of the house ownership and how easy it would be to sell. At the time, I'd dismissed it as normal curiosity, but now it felt like planting a seed, an early step in a long-term plan. "Linda was asking about my will," I confessed to Arthur. "About the house. How quickly it could be sold if I wasn't around anymore." Arthur's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "That's troubling. They know the house is worth a lot now that the area has been gentrified. Look, Joan, I can tell you've been having symptoms lately too." I blinked. "Symptoms? Like what?" "You've seemed more tired," he stated simply. "A little forgetful. I attributed it to grief, but now, knowing what we know about Brian's debt and the questions about the will, we have to consider everything." I thought about it. The headaches I'd been having, the deep, exhausting fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. I had attributed it to my age, to my husband's death. But what if it wasn't natural aging at all? Arthur then laid out his plan, his voice low and commanding. "We need to get to that dealership. They said it's in Florida. That means we have a time constraint. Those cars move fast. While I work on tracking the vehicle, you need to call Brian back. You need to feign acceptance. You tell him you've come to terms with the car being gone, and you're only sorry you didn't get a chance to say goodbye to it." I hated the idea of lying to my son, but the thought of what they might be planning if they knew I was suspicious was far more terrifying. I picked up the phone and dialed Brian. He answered, sounding relieved and guarded. "Hi, Mum. About the check. You should get it soon." I took a deep breath. "Brian, I'm calling to say I understand. It was an old car. I shouldn't have been so emotional. Just thank you for taking care of it." There was a noticeable pause, and then his relief was palpable, even over the phone. "Oh, right. Yeah, Mum. No problem. That's what I'm here for. To take care of you." I hung up, the words, "take care of you," now echoing in my ears with a new, sinister meaning. He wasn't taking care of me. He was taking care of a problem. Arthur stood up. "Good. We've bought ourselves some time. Now I'm going to start digging into that dealership in Florida. You, Joan, you need to focus on what David actually put in that box. It's more than sentiment. It's what they're truly running from." He gave me a final hard look. "This isn't just about money, Joan. This is personal. Be careful. They're watching you." The call with Brian had been unsettling. His immediate relief after my fabricated acceptance was too fast, too obvious. It didn't sound like a son who felt bad for hurting his mother's feelings. It sounded like a man who had successfully cleared a checkpoint. Arthur arrived back at my house shortly after 9, having spent his evening working from his home office. He walked in, his face grim, and immediately handed me his tablet. "I found the car, Joan, or at least where it was supposed to be." The screen displayed a complicated logistics report, but the address at the bottom was clear: Sunshine Auto Remarketing, in a vast industrial park outside Jacksonville, Florida. "They move these vehicles through a network," Arthur explained, pointing to a series of dates. "Brian's construction company has an account with a transport firm that specializes in high-volume, low-value salvage. He didn't just sell it to a local dealer. He put it on a fast track to liquidation. So he deliberately wanted it out of state, out of reach," I concluded, the suspicion hardening into certainty. "Precisely. But here's the unexpected part, and this is where the plot thickens. The car never made it to the auction block in Jacksonville. The manifest shows it was diverted 3 days ago to a private holding lot in Ocala. The paperwork cites mechanical failure requiring specialized inspection as the reason." "Ocala is where David's old partner, Marcus, lives," I whispered, the coincidence too startling to ignore. David and Marcus had run a small, specialized auto repair shop together for decades before David sold his share and retired. Marcus was the only one who knew about David's projects outside of work, the projects he called his sentimental investments. This was the first true break, a convergence of my family's hidden history and Brian's current deceit. Brian's knowledge of the car's destination was supposedly random, yet the car ended up within striking distance of the one man who had been David's most trusted confidant. "You need to call Marcus," Arthur commanded. "Don't tell him why or that I'm involved. Just ask if he's seen the old sedan, and tell him you're worried about the pine box David left in the glove compartment. See how he reacts." The idea of involving Marcus made me nervous, but he was my only real link to the wooden box and whatever secrets it held. I dialed his number. "Marcus, it's Joan," I said when he answered. "Joan? Good heavens, it's been years. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Marcus. I'm calling about the old car. Brian traded it recently, and I have a terrible feeling about it. Did you happen to see it by any chance? I know you know that market." Marcus's voice changed immediately. The warmth vanished, replaced by a guarded hesitation. "The sedan? No, Joan, I haven't seen it. Why would I? It's probably in some junkyard by now." "Because, Marcus, I'm worried about the pine box in the glove compartment. You remember the one David always talked about. Did David ever tell you what was inside that box? Anything at all? There was a long silence, a silence that felt heavy and accusatory. Then Marcus cleared his throat. Joan, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't talked to David about the car since he retired, and I haven't seen Brian in years. I think you should just put the car out of your mind. He was lying. It was not a subtle lie. It was a firm, deliberate pushback, the kind of professional denial you only hear from someone who is actively concealing a fact. I ended the call, my hands clammy. He knows, Arthur. He absolutely knows something. He shut down instantly when I mentioned the box. Arthur nodded, already typing on his tablet. Marcus's finances are clean. He's not Brian's accomplice. He's protecting David's secret, which means the secret in that box is bigger than we thought. We went back to the original mystery, Brian and Linda. I recounted the memory of Linda's insistence that I leave her house early. Then I brought up Brian's habit of suddenly disappearing. He sometimes tells me he's going on long hikes to clear his head, I recounted. He'll be gone for 2 days, no cell service. Check his hiking dates against the dates of your symptoms, Arthur suggested. I went to my personal calendar. August 15th to 17th, Brian hiking. August 18th, my severe headache and extreme fatigue began. September the 5th to 6th, Brian hiking. September the 7th, I completely forgot a lunch appointment with my bridge club, something I never do. The correlations were too sharp, too precise to be coincidence. He wasn't hiking, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He was working. He was creating those problems. Arthur looked at me with immense gravity. Joan, Brian, and Linda aren't just stealing your money. They are actively manipulating your body and your mind. They are eroding your sanity to make their inheritance look natural. We need to move fast. They think the car and the box are gone, but we're going to use that mistake against them. We had 2 days until the car was scheduled to be moved again. 2 days to fly to Florida, find the lot, and retrieve that wooden box before its contents could be lost forever, or worse, found by Brian and Linda. The next morning, I was booked on the earliest flight to Jacksonville. The stakes were no longer about the money. They were about my life and the truth of my late husband's final words. The earliest flight out of Philadelphia left at 6:30 in the morning, which meant Arthur and I were on the road before the first hint of sun. He was driving, silent and focused, while I sat clutching a thermos of strong black coffee. My nerves felt like live wires, constantly humming with a terrifying energy. I had called Brian again, the night before, just to maintain the charade. I told him I was feeling under the weather, that I would be staying close to home for a few days to rest. I lied easily, fluently, and the cold realization of that capability horrified me. We landed in Jacksonville and immediately rented an inconspicuous sedan, the opposite of the luxury cars that filled the Florida airport rental line. Arthur had a route planned out. He explained that the holding lot in Ocala wasn't a public auction site. It was a secure facility used by the transport company for temporary storage. He emphasized the security would be tight, but he had a contact. Marcus is the key, Joan, Arthur reiterated as we drove south on Interstate 95. He lied to you about not knowing the car. He's protecting a secret, but I don't think he's protecting Brian. He's protecting David, and by extension, you. We pulled into a roadside diner outside Ocala, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and endless coffee. Arthur excused himself to make a call. When he returned, his eyes held a new sense of urgency. I talked to Marcus, he stated, not sitting down. I told him Brian had sold the car, and I told him you were asking about the pine box. He broke. He's terrified. He knows what's inside that box, and he confirmed 2 things. First, that the car is at the holding lot, and second, that Brian and Linda are trying to get to it too. Brian and Linda are here, I gasped, the coffee suddenly bitter in my mouth. No, not here yet. But Brian has been calling the transport company incessantly, citing owner emergency and demanding the car be released. They think the car is still in Jacksonville, but the diversion to Ocala threw them off. That bought us a window, but it's closing. Marcus has agreed to meet us at the lot. He has access, and he'll help us get to the car. The drive to the holding lot was tense. The facility was massive, surrounded by high chain-link fences topped with razor wire. It looked more like a prison for vehicles than a storage unit. Marcus was waiting for us outside the main office. A tall, burly man whose usually booming laugh was now replaced by a haunted look. "Joan," he said, pulling me into a quick, rough hug. "I am so sorry about all of this. David would never forgive me for letting his secret get this close to being exposed." "What secret, Marcus? What is in that box?" I demanded, my voice raw. Marcus glanced nervously at the security gate. "Not here. It's too hot. David called me right after he was diagnosed. The doctors gave him 3 months. He didn't want you to know about the illness, the truth of his condition. But he wanted to protect you from something else, something he stumbled upon just before he died. He put the most sensitive data he had into that box." Marcus, using his old repair credentials, managed to convince the guard that he was there to inspect a high-value vehicle scheduled for auction. Arthur and I followed him deep into the maze of parked cars. My sedan looked utterly insignificant, just another piece of junk awaiting its fate. "There it is," Marcus whispered, pointing to the familiar shape of the old car. "He didn't just leave a box in the glove box, Joan. He hid the entire truth about his last year." Marcus produced a slim Jim and quickly unlocked the driver's side door. The interior smelled faintly of stale coffee and my husband's old cologne. I reached out a trembling hand and popped open the glove box. My heart hammered against my ribs. And there it was, sitting innocently in the center console, the plain Vento box, exactly as I remembered it. As I reached for it, Marcus stopped me with a harsh whisper. "Wait, we can't open it here. We need to go." But before we leave, David installed something else, a secondary defense in the dash. He knew Brian would be thorough. David installed a tiny, specialized recorder. It's been capturing everything that happens inside the car since he parked it the last time. My blood ran cold. Brian and Linda had been in this car. They had sold it. What had they said inside? Marcus quickly located the device under the dashboard and handed me a small metallic flash drive. "This contains the last 10 days of recordings. It's a literal black box of your car's final journey. It will tell you everything you need to know about Brian's plan and how far he's willing to go." We scrambled out, Marcus relocking the car. The knowledge that I held not only David's final secret, but also the immediate proof of my children's betrayal, was almost too much to bear. As we sped away, leaving the security lot behind, the flash drive felt like a burning weight in my palm. The car was gone, but the terrible truth was now safely in my hands. The game had changed. Brian and Linda thought they had eliminated the evidence. They were wrong. Now they were on the clock. We didn't stop until we reached a modest motel just outside of Ocala, far away from the holding lot. Marcus, pale and visibly shaking, refused to stay. He insisted he had to get back before Brian noticed his absence or started tracking his phone. He gave me one last, urgent warning. "Joan, Brian is in debt to the wrong kind of people, the kind that don't send bills or lawyers. They send threats. That money, your inheritance, isn't for a new life. It's to save his old one. You need to be fast." With Marcus gone, Arthur and I were alone in the cheap, anonymous motel room. The air conditioning unit rattled and groaned, providing the soundtrack to the unboxing of my late husband's final secret. I placed the pine box on the small, scratched wooden desk. It was just as David had described it. Plain, unfinished, sealed with a single wax stamp bearing our family crest. I picked up the box, turning it over in my hands. It felt heavy, not with weight, but with the pressure of a decade and a half of silence. I hesitated, looking at Arthur. "You need to know the truth, Joan," he said gently, nodding toward the box. "Take a deep breath. Whatever is in there, we face it together." I peeled back the wax seal. The wood was stiff, but it gave way. I lifted the lid. Inside there was no treasure, no jewelry, and no cash. There was only a stack of meticulously folded, age-yellowed documents and a single sealed manila envelope labeled "Only in Emergency." I pushed the envelope aside, my hands fumbling with the documents. They weren't legal papers. They were medical records. David's medical records, dating back 2 years before his death. They confirmed Marcus's brief confession. David hadn't died suddenly. He had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer, given less than 3 months to live. He had kept it from me, not wanting me to suffer through his decline. He wanted me to remember him strong. A wave of grief, fresh and sharp, washed over me. I felt the first tears I had held back in Florida finally fall. All this time, I had thought I was processing a sudden loss, when in fact, David had protected me with a final, beautiful lie. Then, Arthur pointed to a small, handwritten note tucked beneath the stack of medical files. It was David's familiar script. "Joan, if you are reading this, I'm already gone. The car, the box, the records, it's all a smokescreen. The real secret is what I learned about Brian's business partner, Mr. Henderson. He's not legitimate. Brian is in deep, and they've used our old repair shop's assets as collateral. They tried to get me to join. I refused. I believe they will come for you to liquidate the house and finish what they started with me." The letter implied that David hadn't died naturally. He had refused to join a criminal organization that Brian was now heavily involved with, and that refusal had cost him his life. The cancer had only provided the perfect cover. My initial shock at Brian's debt was instantly replaced by terror. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was part of a criminal enterprise. And David's death was not due to disease, but murder. A murder that had been neatly disguised by a genuine terminal illness. This was the ultimate twist, the shattering realization that my children had been living a lie for years. I pushed the box away and grabbed the flash drive Marcus had given me. "We need to hear that recorder, Arthur. Now. I need to know what they said in that car." Arthur quickly plugged the drive into his laptop. The air in the small motel room crackled with tension. The screen showed an audio file labeled Sedan Log 1014. He hit play. The recording was muffled at first, the sound of the car door slamming, then Brian's voice, cold and focused. "It's done. The title is transferred. Mum will get the check next week. It's the least of our worries." Then Linda's voice, edged with a panicked frustration. "But the house is still the main prize, Brian. She's not declining fast enough. The symptoms are too subtle. We need to increase the dosage. She keeps talking about going to the doctor." My breath hitched. Dosage? Brian's response was chilling. "We can't increase the medication. It'll be too obvious. We need to make her look mentally incompetent, like she's losing her mind. That way, when we sell the house, she won't even be able to fight the power of attorney. And don't worry about the debt. Henderson says he'll wipe the slate clean once the house is sold, provided we deliver the entire $700,000. $700,000. The figure was cold and precise. They weren't waiting for my death. They were actively plotting to have me declared unfit, stripping me of my autonomy and my home while I was still alive. "And what about that damn pine box?" Linda demanded, her voice high with anxiety. "Did you check the glove box before you sent it off to auction?" There was a moment of silence in the recording, broken only by the sound of keys jingling. "I didn't need to check, Linda," Brian stated with brutal certainty. "I took care of that months ago. Mum thinks that box is sentimental. But David put his last will and testament in there years ago, stating everything goes to a foundation if my death is suspicious. I replaced the will with a fake. That box is empty. I thought I knew what was inside, and I made sure it contained nothing." The recording stopped. Brian thought the box was empty. He thought he knew the secret. But the documents and the manila envelope were still here. His greed had led him to commit fraud, but his arrogance had blinded him to the possibility of a different, more dangerous secret. The pine box wasn't the bomb. It was the detonator, and Brian had left the pin firmly in place. This realization was the cold determination I needed. I was not just a victim of their greed. I was a target of their murder, a murder that had already claimed my husband. My mind snapped into focus. The grief was now replaced by a burning, cold resolve, a determination to survive and deliver justice. The sound of Brian's voice, cold and calculating on the flash drive, still echoed in the small motel room. He hadn't just plotted my financial ruin. He had confirmed his own role in David's murder, and his casual discussion of my dosage was absolute proof that my fatigue and confusion were chemically induced. The grief I felt for David was now transmuted into a cold, hard fury. There was no time for tears, only for action. "The house is still the main prize," I quoted Linda from the recording, my voice low and steady. "They need the $700,000 to pay off a criminal named Henderson. They don't want me dead yet. They want me declared incompetent so they can take everything legally." Arthur was already on his feet, his mind racing through the legal and criminal implications. "This is no longer a civil matter, Joan. This is organized crime, attempted murder, and conspiracy. We need to go to the FBI. The fact that David's death was covered by an illness, and Brian is tied to an asset liquidation scheme, makes this a federal case." "No," I cut him off, shaking my head firmly. "Not yet. If we go to the authorities now, they'll seize the house, they'll question Brian and Linda, and in their panic, they'll deny everything. They'll dispose of all physical evidence, and without the murder weapon or a confession, it will just be my word, a senile old woman's word, against theirs. They'll walk free." I looked at the manila envelope still sealed on the desk. "Brian thinks he knows what was in the pine box. He thinks the secret is gone, but he's wrong. We have the real evidence right here, and we have the audio proof that confirms their plan to make me look crazy. We are going to let them finish the plan, but on our terms." This was the core of my smart revenge plan. I wasn't seeking personal retribution. I was setting a meticulous legal and emotional trap, one that would make their downfall a social lesson in elder abuse. "Here is the plan, Arthur. We are going back to Pennsylvania. I will play the role they wrote for me, the declining, confused mother. I will be the bait." Arthur looked horrified. "Joan, that's too dangerous. They know you were suspicious. They won't trust you." "They have to," I insisted, a grim smile touching my lips. "Their debt is too pressing. Henderson is breathing down Brian's neck. Marcus confirmed that. Their plan needs to conclude quickly, which means they will overlook their suspicions and double down on making me look incompetent. We will use the manila envelope to buy us the time we need and to set the final stage." We carefully opened the envelope. Inside, I found not more medical records, but two objects: a set of keys and a small antique-looking USB drive. There was also a short note from David. Joan, the keys belong to the safe deposit box at the Second National Bank downtown. The USB contains my final project, the one Henderson tried to exploit. Brian doesn't know about this location. This is your insurance. If you need it, you know what to do. I love you. The USB drive felt cold in my hand. It was the original truth, the one Brian had failed to uncover. Arthur's eyes narrowed with renewed respect. David was always 10 steps ahead. This is perfect. We have the motive, the confession, and now the insurance policy. We immediately flew back to Pennsylvania, booking a different flight and using a different disguise to ensure no one tracked our return. Arthur took a temporary apartment near my neighborhood, maintaining his detective persona while setting up the technical side of the plan. The first step was to establish the facade. I called Brian and Linda. "Brian," I said, my voice shaky and tired, playing the part of the frail, forgetful mother. "I'm so sorry. I think I was confused. I saw the car in a strange lot in Florida in my dreams, I think. I haven't been feeling well. I'm worried I'm losing my mind." The silence on the other end was palpable. Then Brian's voice, dripping with false sympathy, came through. "Mum, it's all right. We told you it was just old age and stress. Linda and I are coming over right now. We're going to take care of you." Their immediate and enthusiastic response confirmed my suspicions. They were ready to conclude their plot. They had bought the lie. I was back on the chessboard. But this time, I was the one moving the pieces. I was home, ready to face my children and execute the revenge that David's memory demanded. The fight was about to become physical, and I was ready for it. My quiet fight for the truth had escalated into a desperate struggle for my life, played out inside the very walls of my sanctuary. Brian and Linda arrived less than an hour after my fake call, their faces a carefully constructed mask of concern. They rushed in, bringing a casserole dish and a six-pack of imported beer, playing the role of the devoted children perfectly. But I saw the frantic, hungry calculation in their eyes. They were not here to comfort me. They were here to accelerate the final phase. "Mum, you really shouldn't worry about the car," Brian said, resting his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a snake coiling around me. "You've been through a lot. The doctor said you need rest." "Yes, Mum," Linda chimed in, too cheerfully. "Maybe you should stop drinking that black coffee. It probably makes your hands shake. Why don't I make you a nice cup of herbal tea? We brought some new Sleepy Time blend." Herbal tea. I knew exactly what that Sleepy Time blend contained. It was likely a larger dose of the chemical cocktail they had been using to fog my mind and weaken my body. I played my role. I leaned heavily on the kitchen counter, rubbing my temples dramatically. "Oh, the headaches are terrible, and I keep forgetting things. I'm worried, kids. I keep thinking about that old car and the wooden box. I feel like I missed something important in there, something David wanted me to know, but I just can't remember." Brian and Linda exchanged a quick, triumphant look, the kind of look that confirmed they had me exactly where they wanted. They believed the fatigue and confusion were real, induced by their own poison. "Mom, that box was sentimental junk," Brian scoffed, taking the casserole dish to the oven. "Just old letters, nothing of value. We already checked it. It's gone forever, so don't stress yourself out." "But wait," I said, stumbling toward the dining room hutch where I stored my linens. This was the moment I set the bait. "I did find something else recently, tucked away in my linen drawer. Another piece of David's past. I think it might be important, but I can't quite make sense of it." I opened the drawer and pulled out a small, velvet-lined jewelry box. It was a decoy, carefully planted there before they arrived. I opened it, revealing a fake pearl necklace and, crucially, a single, loose, antique-looking key. Not the safe deposit key, but one designed to look similar. I think this key belongs to a safety deposit box at the old State Street Bank, I whispered, my voice laced with fake anxiety. David used to go there. What if he put something in there instead of the car? Something for you two. The reaction was immediate and raw. Brian's eyes widened, and Linda froze by the stovetop. They had already liquidated every asset they thought I possessed, but the thought of a hidden secondary asset, one that David had secured specifically for them, was too great a temptation for their greed to resist. "The State Street Bank closed years ago, Mum," Linda said, trying to sound dismissive, but her voice cracked with thinly veiled excitement. "No, I think it merged," Brian corrected her, his focus entirely on the key. He stepped toward me, his movements suddenly sharp and predatory. "Let me see that, Mum. You're confused. We'll handle this." I clutched the jewelry box tight, playing the frightened victim. "No, David told me not to trust the lawyers. He said only Ud could open it. But I can't remember the combination or the date. Maybe tomorrow when my head is clearer." This was the impactful physical challenge I had planned. By denying them immediate access, I forced them to make a move. They couldn't wait until tomorrow. Henderson's debt was too urgent. Brian's polite mask shattered instantly. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. It was a brief, sharp flash of the violence that lay beneath his polished exterior. "Give me the key, Mum. We don't have time for this nonsense. Don't you understand how much trouble I'm in?" The pain shot up my arm, but I stood my ground, my eyes locked with his. The physical confrontation was brief, but it confirmed everything I needed to know. They would use force to get what they wanted. Linda quickly intervened, pulling Brian away. "Stop it, Brian. She's confused, remember? We need to be subtle. We can't let her run off to the police claiming assault. Not now." Linda then turned her forced smile back on me, her eyes cold as ice. "We're sorry, Mum. Brian is just stressed about work. You just keep that key safe, okay? We'll figure out the bank tomorrow. Now, how about that tea?" They thought they had settled the matter, that I would keep the key and be too confused to use it. But their frantic response had bought Arthur the time he needed. As Linda busied herself making the poisoned tea and Brian nervously paced the kitchen, I used my phone under the table. I sent a text message to Arthur with the code word we had agreed on. Checkmate. It meant the trap was set. They had seen the decoy key, they had confirmed their motive with their panicked actions, and I had successfully convinced them that the real prize was at the fake bank. Arthur's final step in the plan was now in motion, planting the recording devices that would capture their final confession, the one that would guarantee they never walked free. The game was no longer about a pine box or a car. It was about the cold, hard realization of a life-or-death confrontation under my own roof. The air in my kitchen was thick with unspoken tension, a deadly mixture of Brian's panic and Linda's forced calm. I watched as Linda fussed over the kettle, the steam rising to fog the window pane. It was a perfect domestic scene of betrayal. I knew the Sleepy Time blend tea contained a much higher dose than usual, designed to put me into a deep, confusing stupor, enabling them to move forward with the power of attorney paperwork they undoubtedly had ready. As Linda turned her back, I quietly poured the simmering herbal infusion directly into the potted fern on the counter. The fern, unfortunately, was now collateral damage in my war. I quickly replaced the liquid in my mug with plain, hot tap water. "Here you go, Mum," Linda said, her voice sugary sweet, handing me the mug. "Drink it while it's hot. It will calm your nerves about that silly old key." I took a deliberate, exaggerated sip, sighing contentedly. Oh, that is wonderful, dear. You really are so thoughtful. They believed I was sinking back into confusion, making them sloppy. Brian immediately turned his attention to the linen hutch where I had placed the decoy key. He was practically vibrating with greed and urgency. Look, Mum, since you're feeling better after that tea, why don't you just tell us what the combination is? We can run down to the bank first thing tomorrow morning and handle this for you. Save you the stress. I played with the fake key on the table, my eyes wide and unfocused. Combination? Oh dear. I think I think it was our anniversary date. You know, when David and I first started dating? October 9th? Or was it the 20th? Their patience snapped. Brian grabbed the key. Forget the combination. We'll just tell the bank it was lost. We have the key. We'll just forge the signature if we have to. That bank is probably full of old bonds or something David forgot about. This was the opening I needed to execute the final stage of the revenge. I stood up and staggered dramatically toward the back door, leaning heavily on the wall. Oh, my head. I need some fresh air. Just a minute, children. I feel like I'm going to pass out. As I stumbled out onto the back porch, Brian and Linda didn't follow. They were too preoccupied with the key and the imaginary fortune it represented. This was Arthur's window. He had parked his van 2 blocks away, waiting for my signal. While they were distracted, Arthur, a master of silent entry, slipped into the house through the basement window I had left slightly ajar. He was a shadow moving through the house, carrying nothing but 2 miniature military-grade recording devices. I stayed on the porch for 10 minutes, giving Arthur time to plant the first recorder under the kitchen table, the epicenter of their confession, and the second one behind the old bookshelf in the living room, their likely secondary meeting spot. When I came back inside, the atmosphere had changed. Brian was on the phone, speaking in hushed, furious tones. Linda was hovering anxiously. No, Henderson, I told you, I have the key. We will have the access tomorrow. Stop threatening me. Brian hissed into the receiver, slamming the phone down. The sound resonated with pure, raw desperation. What did Henderson say? Linda demanded, her voice tight. Did he threaten us again? He said he needs the 300,000 by the end of the week, or he's going to the authorities with what he knows about the construction site fraud, Brian admitted, running his hands through his hair. Forget the slow play, Linda. We need to move on the house now. We'll just tell Mum we're taking her for a checkup and have her sign the power of attorney forms while she's sedated. They began arguing furiously, their voices low, close to the kitchen table. It has to look natural, Linda insisted, pacing near the counter. We can't risk murder charges again, not after what happened with Dad. We were so lucky the cancer covered that up. We need to make it look like a tragic accident. A fall down the stairs, perhaps, in her confused state. Brian scoffed. A fall is too risky. She needs to be completely incompetent first. We need the house money, not an investigation. Henderson is the real problem. He knows I swapped David's real will for the fake one, the one that guarantees us everything. Every word they spoke was a nail in their own coffin. The recorders were silently capturing everything: the admission of David's murder, the confirmation of the power of attorney plot, the explicit mention of the forged will, and the exact amount of their debt to a known criminal. This was the climax, the moment their carefully constructed lie crumbled under the pressure of their own greed. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, a terrifying smile spreading across my face. They thought they were alone, whispering their darkest secrets, but they were performing for an audience of 2, me and the future detective who would be listening to the playback. The bait had been taken. The trap was sprung. I waited in the dining room, listening to the desperate murmur of my children's conspiracy. Their voices were low, but the recorders under the table were surely picking up every venomous word. Sedated, fall down the stairs, forged will. The fury gave way to a cold, frightening clarity. They weren't just greedy. They were sociopaths who had murdered their own father and were now planning the final act against their mother. I decided to make my presence known. I stood in the doorway, my body ramrod straight, all traces of the confused, tired old woman erased. My voice, usually soft, cut through their argument like a sheet of ice. The $300,000. Is that what Henderson is demanding, Brian? They froze. Brian dropped the fake safe deposit key, which clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. Linda gasped, clutching the counter for support. The sheer terror in their eyes was the only apology I would ever receive. Mom, what are you talking about? Are you feeling all right? Linda stammered, recovering slightly, trying to pull the confused mask back over her face. Don't, I warned, taking a slow step toward them. Don't insult my intelligence one more time with your herbal tea and your tired old mother act. My head has never been clearer, Linda. It's quite amazing what the truth can do for a headache. Brian finally found his voice, laced with frantic denial. Mom, you're hallucinating. I don't know any Henderson. We were talking about a construction supply order. You must have misheard. I walked over to the kitchen table, the place where we had shared decades of family meals, and picked up the fake key Brian had dropped. I looked directly at him, my expression unwavering. You said you swapped David's will for a fake one, Brian. The one that guarantees you the house. You said you were lucky the cancer covered up his murder. You were worried about the dosage on the tea. Were those supply orders too? Or were those the ingredients for your latest batch of poison? The silence was deafening. Linda's face had drained of all colour, and Brian's eyes were darting around the room, frantically searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. The physical impact of my direct accusation shattered their carefully constructed reality. How do you know that? Brian whispered, the denial gone, replaced by pure, cornered animal fear. How do you know about… The car was gone. You thought you were so smart, sending it to Florida to be shredded, but you didn't check the one place you were sure was empty, I interrupted, pulling the authentic USB drive from my pocket and placing it on the table. You thought the pine box only contained the old will you forged, but David put his real insurance policy in there. The one that tells me everything I need to know about your criminal partner, Henderson, and your construction fraud. This was the final, devastating plot twist. They hadn't failed because of a leaky faucet. They had failed because they underestimated their father and their mother. Linda, surprisingly, broke first. She took a stumbling step back, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The house! We needed the house, Mom. I'm sorry. We owe money. Brian… Before she could confess more, Brian erupted. He lunged across the table, his face a mask of primal rage, his eyes focused on the USB drive. This was the moment I had prepared for, the physical confrontation that had been inevitable since the moment I walked in. That's enough, he roared, lunging for the drive. You won't ruin me. You won't. I was quicker. I swept the USB off the table and stepped back, but Brian was already on me. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me violently, the years of suppressed rage and financial anxiety boiling over. The pain was sharp, but the cold fury anchoring me was stronger. Where is it, you crazy old woman? Give me the key! Give me the data! I held his gaze, refusing to scream or cry. You already took the car, Brian. You took David. You won't take my dignity. Before he could escalate the attack, a thunderous crash erupted from the back of the house. Arthur, who had been listening to the confrontation on a discreet receiver, had set off a distraction, a prearranged signal. The noise made Brian pause, his grip loosening momentarily. That was all I needed. I spun out of his grasp, grabbing the hot kettle that Linda had used for the poisoned tea, and slammed it down onto the kitchen counter with a violent clatter. The noise was shocking. "I know the truth, Brian, and the police know it too," I lied, knowing the recorders had already done their work. "You tried to murder me, and you murdered your father. It's over." Brian looked at Linda, who was paralyzed with fear. He saw the police lights flashing outside the window, a visual bluff I knew Arthur was coordinating with a timed signal from his car. It was too late for him to escape. The full weight of his colossal failure crashed down on him. He collapsed onto the kitchen floor, sobbing with a deep, wretched sound that wasn't regret, but self-pity. Linda just stood there, staring at the tea mug on the counter, the one I hadn't actually drunk. The weight of her guilt was crushing her. It was a complete and immediate collapse of their operation, achieving the intense, climactic peak the story demanded. The fight was done, and justice was finally ready to be served. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a terrifying stillness. Brian was a heap of useless rage on the kitchen floor, his desperate sobs echoing against the tiles. Linda stood petrified, staring at the invisible line I had drawn in the sand, the one separating her life from her mother's. The flashing lights outside, the distraction Arthur had orchestrated, had done their job. They had paralyzed the conspirators long enough for the truth to sink in. I walked past Brian's prostrate form and approached Linda, who was still leaning against the counter. Her facade was completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly fear of a woman facing decades in prison. "You knew about the tea, Linda," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "You knew what it would do. You studied chemistry. You designed the perfect cocktail to make me look crazy so you could steal my life." Linda didn't meet my eyes. She only shook her head frantically. "No, I didn't want to. Brian said we had to. He said Henderson would kill us both. He owes $300,000, Mum. He lost it all on bad investments and gambling. We were desperate." She was offering her confession, a frantic bargain for salvation. It wasn't remorse for her actions, but sheer terror of the consequences. "You didn't have to poison me," I countered. "You could have come to me. I would have helped you." "We couldn't," she cried, finally looking up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Brian said if we went to you, Henderson would know we were weak. He said the only way out was to solve all our problems permanently and legally." This was the opening I needed to execute the final, heartbreaking stage of the chastisement. I wasn't just exposing them. I was forcing Linda to make a choice that might save her soul, if not her freedom. "Did you help Brian plan David's death, Linda?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Linda didn't hesitate this time. The full weight of the truth finally broke her. She collapsed onto the floor next to Brian, burying her face in her hands. Her voice was muffled, racked with true, genuine grief for the first time. "It was the tea," she choked out. "The first stage. He was already weak from the cancer, but Brian increased the dose just enough to mimic a massive immune failure. We convinced the doctors it was a complication of his illness. I helped him. I gave him the formula." The emotional blow was worse than any physical pain Brian had inflicted. The memory of David, my beloved husband, being betrayed by his own children, was a fresh, searing wound. Brian, hearing Linda's confession, lifted his head, his eyes blazing with a final, furious attempt at control. "Shut up, Linda! Don't tell her anything. She's lying. She's recording us." "Yes, she is, Brian," a deep voice cut in. The kitchen door opened, and Arthur stepped inside, holding the 2 miniature recorders, their tiny red lights blinking steadily. He was followed by 2 uniformed police officers who had been waiting for the signal, confirming that my original bluff about the police was now a reality. "The party's over, kids," Arthur said, his expression grim. "We have it all recorded. the conspiracy to commit fraud, the admission of attempting to have your mother declared mentally incompetent, and the full confession regarding the murder of David Vance. The officers moved quickly, pulling Brian up from the floor. He didn't resist, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a devastating realization of his ruin. As the officers were placing him in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time, not with regret, but with a vacant, empty fury. Linda, however, was quiet. An officer moved to cuff her, but I stepped forward, resting my hand on Linda's trembling shoulder. "Wait," I told the officer. Then I looked at Linda, my eyes welling up with tears that were not for my pain, but for her lost soul. "Linda, I have the original USB drive, David's project, the one that exposes Henderson and the entire construction fraud scheme. If you cooperate, if you tell the police everything about Henderson, about the money laundering, about the construction fraud, it might not change your charge for my attempted murder, but it will show the court that you are capable of atonement. It will be your only chance at redemption." Linda looked at me, then at the USB drive in Arthur's hand, then back at Brian, who was being led away. She knew the difference between a life sentence and a chance at parole. She knew the power of the evidence she held against a powerful criminal organization. "Henderson uses the construction company to launder money through fake subcontracts," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can give you the accounts, the dates, everything." This moment of redemptive choice, forced by the confrontation, was the element of release I had planned. I had achieved justice, and in the process, I had offered my child, however flawed and criminal, a solitary, desperate chance to choose the right path for once in her life. The officers took Linda and Brian away. The house was left in silence, shattered and empty. I sat at the kitchen table with Arthur, the scent of stale coffee and fear still hanging in the air. The final stage of my journey, the healing and the rebuilding, was about to begin. The hours following Brian and Linda's arrest were a blur of police reports, detectives, and the cold, professional demeanor of the law. Arthur and I turned over the USB drive, the audio recordings, and David's medical records. Linda, staying true to her word, started confessing, providing the precise accounting details of Henderson's criminal network. Her cooperation, born out of fear and a sliver of desperation for atonement, blew the door wide open on the fraud that had claimed David's life. Brian, on the other hand, remained fiercely unrepentant, denying the murder of his father and clinging to the narrative that his mother was simply senile. But the audio recording, where he explicitly discussed the dosage and the forged will, was impossible to refute. The house, my sanctuary for 40 years, was now a crime scene, sealed off by police tape. I couldn't bear to be there. Arthur secured the safety deposit box, and inside, we found the final piece of the puzzle. Not millions of dollars, but documents detailing David's lifelong dream, a non-profit foundation dedicated to providing financial education and support for the elderly in our county. It was called the David Vance Integrity Fund. He had started planning it right after he learned about his terminal illness, turning his final months into a quest for a legacy of truth, not a legacy of sorrow. The legal battle was long and brutal. Brian was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and multiple counts of construction fraud. Linda, due to her late but crucial cooperation, received a plea deal for a lesser sentence on the fraud and attempted murder charges. I attended every day of the trial. I didn't go to punish them, but to watch the justice system confirm the truth, validating my sanity and my husband's sacrifice. When the verdicts were read, there was no feeling of triumph, only a deep, weary sense of completion. Brian received a significant sentence, reflecting the malice and lack of remorse for both his father's murder and his plot against me. Linda's sentence was lighter, but still demanded years of her life in prison. The closure did not come from the prison bars, but from the act of forgiveness and rebuilding. I sold the house, not in disgust, but with a new purpose. That house was the symbol of their betrayal, but the money from its sale became the seed capital for the David Vance Integrity Fund. I didn't move far. I bought a small condo near the community college, where I started taking classes in finance and non-profit management. Arthur, officially retired again, became the fund's chief investigator, ensuring that every penny went toward its mission. The fund quickly found its footing. We started a hotline, held free seminars for seniors on spotting financial abuse, and provided legal aid. I stood before rooms full of elderly faces, sharing my story without the names, speaking about the danger of blind trust and the power of vigilance. I transformed my deepest trauma into a social victory. I exchanged letters with Linda. Her words are filled with genuine remorse, no longer the self-pitying whining, but a quiet acceptance of responsibility. She never asked for my help in her appeal. She only writes about her plans to work for elder justice awareness when she is released. The relationship is forever fractured, the trust irrevocably broken. But there is a faint, fragile thread of reconciliation based on truth and atonement. I forgave Linda, not for her sake, but for mine, because holding on to that hatred would have been another kind of poison. Arthur and I often meet at the park overlooking the ocean, the same kind of view David had always loved. We sit and talk, not about crime or betrayal, but about the future of the fund, about helping the people who needed us. He calls me his partner in justice. I realize now that the worst thing Brian and Linda did was not steal my money or plot my death. It was that they tried to steal my future and destroy my belief in love. They failed. David's final act saved my life and gave it a profound purpose. The empty space left by my children's betrayal was filled by a renewed love for community, for truth, and for the powerful, redemptive act of turning a horrific wrong into a meaningful right. The pine box was empty, but the life it unlocked was finally full. And so, my listeners, that's where my story truly begins, not where it ends. I learned that the most dangerous secrets aren't buried in the ground. They're whispered in the places we consider safest. My question to you is this: what if the betrayal isn't a single, shocking event, but a slow, subtle erosion of your trust? If a simple missing car could unravel a plot of murder and fraud, what small, strange detail in your own life might be the tip of a terrifying iceberg? Don't let love blind you to the truth. Stay vigilant, stay clear, and trust your gut.